Welcome to tonight's sleep story. This tale will be accompanied by the gentle sound of rain to help you drift off to sleep. Before you get too comfortable, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. I'd love to know where in the world you're watching from and what time it is there. Leave a comment below. It's fascinating to see how our community spans different time zones, all united in seeking a peaceful night's rest. Now, make yourself comfortable, adjust your volume, and let the rain and story guide you into peaceful dreams. Our story begins. The first time Eleanor Reed heard the footsteps above her bedroom ceiling, she dismissed them as the settling of old wood. The Victorian-era farmhouse she'd inherited from her grandmother had stood for over a century, its bones creaking and whispering with every change in temperature. But on the third night, when the footsteps traced a deliberate path from one end of the attic to the other at precisely 3:17 a.m., she could no longer pretend they were anything but what they were. Someone or something was walking up there. The inheritance had come as a surprise. Eleanor hadn't visited the house since she was 12, when her parents had abruptly stopped bringing her to her grandmother's for their annual summer visits. She'd never understood why, and her attempts to ask had been met with tight-lipped silence from her mother and changes of subject from her father. Now, 20 years later, with both her parents and grandmother gone, she found herself the owner of a property that felt more like a stranger than a childhood memory. "You really planning to live up here all alone?" Tom Henderson, the local handyman, had asked when she'd hired him to check the house's electrical system. His weathered face had creased with concern as he'd looked up at the third-floor windows. Might want to consider getting a dog, at least, for company. But Eleanor had always preferred solitude. After her divorce 2 years ago, she'd thrown herself into her work as a restoration artist, specializing in bringing old photographs back to life. The idea of spending her days in the quiet countryside, working on her digital commissions and gradually restoring the house, had seemed perfect. That was before the footsteps, before the shadows. Rolling over in bed, Eleanor grabbed her phone from the nightstand. 3:17 a.m. Exactly. The footsteps continued their measured pace, heel-toe, crossing directly above her head. She held her breath, tracking the sound as it moved toward the far end of the attic, where she knew there was only a small circular window overlooking the overgrown gardens below. The steps stopped. In the sudden silence, Eleanor became aware of another sound. A soft, rhythmic scratching, like fingernails against wood. It seemed to be coming from the attic stairs at the end of the second-floor hallway. Her heart pounding, Eleanor slipped out of bed and grabbed the baseball bat she'd started keeping nearby. The aged floorboards were cold beneath her feet as she crept to her bedroom door and pressed her ear against it. The scratching grew louder. With trembling fingers, she turned on her phone's flashlight. The beam caught dust motes dancing in the air, stirred by a draft that shouldn't have been there. All the windows were closed. Eleanor pulled open her door and stepped into the hallway. The scratch marks on the attic door were new, deep grooves in the wood that hadn't been there when she'd gone to bed. As she watched, another line appeared, carved by an invisible claw. "Hello?" Her voice sounded small in the darkness. "Is someone there?" The scratching stopped. Then, slowly, the attic door began to open. Eleanor raised her bat, the beam of her flashlight illuminating the narrow staircase beyond. The stairs twisted up into darkness, the light seemingly swallowed by the shadows at the top. And there, on the third step from the bottom, was a single dusty footprint too small to be an adult's. A child's giggle echoed from above. Every instinct screamed at Eleanor to run, to get out of the house and never look back. But something else, a deeper pull she couldn't explain, drew her forward. The same curiosity that had driven her to restore old photographs, to uncover the stories hidden in faded images, now urged her to climb those stairs. The wood creaked beneath her weight as she ascended. The air grew colder with each step, and a musty smell, like old paper and decay, filled her nostrils. When she reached the top, she swept her flashlight across the attic space. The beam caught something that made her breath catch. Hundreds of photographs, covering every inch of the sloped walls. Black and white images of people she didn't recognize, their faces turned toward the camera with expressions ranging from solemn to smiling. But something was wrong with them. In every photo, standing behind the subjects, was a dark figure, a shadow that seemed to be watching. Moving closer, Eleanor examined one of the photographs. It showed a family of 4, posed in front of what she recognized as the farmhouse, but decades earlier. The parents and 2 children smiled stiffly at the camera, while behind them, partially obscured by a tree, stood a tall, indistinct shape that seemed to bend toward them. They never saw it coming. The voice came from behind her, high and clear, a child's voice, but with an undertone that made Eleanor's skin crawl. She spun around, the flashlight beam cutting through empty air. "Who's there?" "They never do." The voice seemed to move, now coming from near the circular window. "It's better that way. Easier." In the beam of her flashlight, Eleanor saw more footprints appearing in the dust, small, bare feet walking toward her. But there was something wrong with them. They were backward, as if someone was walking away while facing her. "What are you?" Eleanor's voice shook. "What do you want?" "To show you." The voice was right beside her ear now. "Look closer at the pictures. Look at what's really there." Against her better judgment, Eleanor turned back to the photographs. In one, she recognized her grandmother as a young woman, standing in the garden. The shadow behind her seemed more distinct in this image. A tall, thin figure with impossibly long fingers reaching toward her shoulder. "Keep looking," the voice urged. "Find yourself." Eleanor's flashlight beam moved frantically from photo to photo until there. Her breath stopped. A photograph she recognized, one taken during her last summer visit. 12-year-old Eleanor sat on the porch steps, her long hair in braids, smiling at the camera, and behind her, clearer than in any other photo, was the figure. Its face, if it could be called a face, was a void of swirling shadows, but its mouth was open in what might have been a smile. "You were meant to be here," the voice whispered. "We've been waiting so long." The flashlight flickered and died. In the darkness, Eleanor felt something cold brush against her cheek, like fingers, but too long, too thin. The photographs on the walls began to rustle, though there was no wind. "Your grandmother understood," the voice continued. "She saw us, captured us in her photographs. But she grew too frightened, tried to keep others away. That's why your parents stopped bringing you. They never understood the gift." Eleanor's mind raced. Her grandmother had been a photographer, she remembered now. The camera always around her neck, her insistence on documenting everything. But in her later years, she destroyed most of her work, burned entire albums. The gift? The ability to see what others can't, to capture what lives in the shadows. The voice was excited now. "Look at your hands." Eleanor looked down and gasped. Her fingers were elongating, stretching into impossible shapes. Her skin seemed to absorb the darkness, becoming translucent, then transparent, revealing swirling shadows beneath. "What's happening to me?" "You're becoming," the voice said simply. "Like us. Like your grandmother almost did, before she fought it. But you won't fight it, will you? You understand the beauty of shadows, the stories they tell. That's why you restore old photographs, to bring the past back to life. But we can show you how to do so much more." The attic was filling with whispers now, countless voices speaking in languages Eleanor didn't recognize. The photographs continued to rustle, and in the dim light filtering through the circular window, she could see the shadows in them moving, reaching out of their paper prisons. "Join us," the voices said in unison. "Become the shadow in someone else's photograph." Eleanor tried to step back, but her feet wouldn't move. The shadows were swirling around her now, seeping into her skin. She could feel herself changing, becoming less solid, more fluid. Part of her wanted to scream, to fight against this transformation. But another part, a part that had always been drawn to the mysteries hidden in old images, felt a thrill of excitement. "Yes," she whispered, and felt the shadows smile. The transformation was both agonizing and ecstatic. Eleanor felt herself stretching, growing, becoming something that existed between light and dark, between past and present. Her consciousness expanded, and suddenly she could see everything. Every shadow in every photograph ever taken in this house, every story captured and hidden away. She saw her grandmother as a young woman, discovering the truth about the shadows, spending years documenting them before fear overtook her. She saw the countless others who had come before, some fighting, some embracing their fate, and she saw what she would become: a watcher, a keeper of stories, a presence that would live forever in the space between reality and image. Perfect, the voices whispered. Now you understand. Eleanor moved toward the circular window, her new form flowing like liquid darkness. Dawn was approaching, the first hints of light touching the horizon. Soon, the household would begin stirring to life in the town below. People would wake, live their lives, take their photographs, never knowing what watched from the shadows. But she would know. She would see everything, capture everything, become part of every image taken in shadow. And sometimes, on special nights, she would walk the attic floor at exactly 3:17 a.m., letting her footsteps echo through the house, calling to others who might have the gift. The last traces of Eleanor Reed's human form dissolved, just as the sun's first rays touched the attic window. All that remained was a shadow, darker and deeper than any natural darkness, and a single photograph that fluttered to the floor, a new image, showing the empty attic with a tall, elegant shadow figure standing by the window, its long fingers reaching toward the camera as if in welcome. In the years that followed, locals would sometimes report strange sights in the old farmhouse's windows, movements glimpsed at twilight, shadows that seemed to watch and wait. Amateur photographers who ventured onto the property would find their images marred by inexplicable dark figures lurking in the background. And on quiet nights, at exactly 3:17 a.m., those awake might hear footsteps in the attic, moving with deliberate purpose from one end to the other. But no one ever saw Eleanor Reed again. She had become something else entirely, a shadow among shadows, a story untold, a presence that lived in the space between light and dark, watching, waiting, and sometimes, if the photograph was just right, reaching out with long, elegant fingers to welcome another into the darkness. They say if you look closely at old photographs taken in the area, you might see her, a tall, graceful shadow with impossibly long fingers, always positioned just behind the subject, always seeming to smile. But most people don't look that closely at their photographs. Perhaps that's for the best. The iron gates of Willow Manor groaned open like a mouth releasing its final breath. Detective Marcus Chen killed the engine of his police cruiser and sat for a moment, studying the imposing Victorian mansion through the steadily increasing rain. Thunder rolled across the hills of northern Massachusetts, and skeletal tree branches clawed at a sky dark as bruised flesh. 3 disappearances in 6 months, all young women, all traced back to this place. And now a 4th had vanished, Catherine Mills, age 22, last seen entering these grounds 3 days ago. Marcus checked his service weapon and grabbed his flashlight. The Historical Society wouldn't appreciate him picking their locks at midnight, but a judge had finally granted the warrant after Catherine's disappearance. Too little, too late, in his opinion. They should have been in here months ago. The gravel driveway crunched under his boots as he approached the front steps. Willow Manor had been abandoned since 1963, when the last of the Blackwood family line had died under mysterious circumstances. Now it served as a museum, though served might be too generous a term. It was open only by appointment, and those were rarely granted. The lock on the front door gave way easily to his picks. Too easily. Marcus frowned, testing the handle. It was already unlocked. He drew his weapon and pushed the door open slowly. The entrance hall was a cathedral to decay. Moonlight filtered through grimy windows, illuminating dust motes that danced like lost souls in the beam of his flashlight. A grand staircase curved up to the darkness of the 2nd floor, its banister festooned with cobwebs. The air smelled of mold and something else, something metallic and familiar that made his cop instinct scream. Blood. A sound echoed from above, footsteps, light and quick, moving across the upper floor. Marcus aimed his flashlight at the ceiling, tracking the noise. "Police," he called out. "If someone's up there, identify yourself." The footsteps stopped. Then came a giggle, high-pitched, childlike, but somehow wrong. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Marcus started up the stairs, wincing at every creak of the aged wood. His training told him to wait for backup, but 4 women were missing. If someone was up there... The second floor was a long hallway lined with closed doors. Portraits hung on the walls, generations of Blackwoods staring down at him with dark, hollow eyes. The footsteps had seemed to come from the far end, where a larger set of double doors stood partially open. As he moved down the hallway, Marcus noticed something odd about the portraits. In each one, the subject seemed to be looking at something just over their right shoulder, their expressions caught between fear and fascination. And in the shadows behind them, there seemed to be shapes, dark forms that might have been tricks of the light, might have been flaws in the ancient paintings, but looked unsettlingly like figures standing just out of focus. The giggle came again, this time definitely from behind those double doors. Marcus approached slowly, weapon ready. A flash of lightning illuminated the hallway for a split second, and in that instant, he could have sworn he saw all the painted figures turn their heads to watch him pass. The master bedroom beyond the double doors was massive, dominated by a 4-poster bed draped in rotting silk. Rain lashed against tall windows that looked out over the estate's overgrown gardens. Marcus swept his flashlight across the room, noting the vanity table with its cracked mirror, the wardrobe standing open and empty, the rocking chair moving slowly in the corner. He froze. There was no breeze in here. The windows were sealed shut, but the rocking chair was definitely moving, creaking back and forth with the weight of an invisible occupant. "Police," he said again, his voice steady despite the cold sweat breaking out on his forehead. "Show yourself." The rocking stopped. In the silence that followed, Marcus became aware of a soft sound coming from the vanity table, a wet, rhythmic dripping. He moved closer, flashlight beam revealing dark droplets falling from the edge of the table to form a pool on the wooden floor. The liquid was thick, dark red, and fresh. Fresh blood. A floorboard creaked behind him. Marcus spun around, flashlight beam cutting through empty air. But there, in the cracked mirror of the vanity, he caught a glimpse of something that made his blood run cold. A figure standing directly behind him, tall and thin, wearing a dress that might once have been white but was now stained crimson. Its face was hidden behind long dark hair, but he could see its mouth, stretched in an impossible smile that reached literally from ear to ear. He whirled again, but there was nothing there. When he looked back at the mirror, the figure was gone. The temperature in the room plummeted suddenly, his breath visible in the beam of the flashlight. The blood on the floor began to move, flowing across the wooden planks as if pulled by an invisible force. It traced patterns, forming letters, then words. "Welcome home, detective." "Jesus Christ," Marcus whispered. His hand was steady on his weapon, but his mind was reeling, trying to rationalize what he was seeing. This had to be some kind of elaborate setup, a prank, or maybe something staged by the killer to frighten off investigation. The giggle came again, closer now. A child's voice began to sing. "Ring around the rosy, pocket full of posies, ashes, ashes." Multiple voices joined in for the final line, a chorus of children's voices that seemed to come from the very walls. "We all fall down." The doors slammed shut behind him. Marcus ran to them, but the handles wouldn't turn. The temperature dropped further, frost crystallizing on the windows. In the mirror, he could see more figures appearing, women in white dresses, their faces hidden, swaying slightly as if moved by an unfelt wind. The blood on the floor continued to move, writing new words. They came looking too. Images began to flash through his mind, memories that weren't his own. He saw Catherine Mills walking up the gravel driveway, her curiosity overtaking her fear. He saw the other missing women, each drawn to different parts of the mansion. He saw decades of victims, stretching back through time, all following the siren song of Willow Manor's mysteries. And he saw what waited for them here. The mirror cracked, spider web fractures spreading across its surface. In each broken segment, Marcus could see a different face. All the missing women, their eyes wide with terror, their mouths open in silent screams. And behind each of them stood the tall figure in the blood-stained dress, its grotesque smile widening impossibly further. "They never learn," the child's voice said from everywhere and nowhere. "They come looking for answers, but they only find us. Will you be different?" Detective, will you solve the mystery? Marcus backed away from the mirror, bumping into the four-poster bed. Something wet dripped onto his shoulder. He looked up. The ceiling was covered in crawling shapes, humanoid figures moving like spiders, their heads twisted backward to stare down at him with milk-white eyes. Dark liquid blood dripped from their fingers, their hair, their twisted smiles. No. Marcus raised his weapon, though he knew somehow that it would be useless. What are you? We are the curse, the voices said in unison. We are the price. We are what happens to those who look too deeply into the mysteries of Willow Manor. The figures began to descend, moving down the walls like a tide of shadows and blood. The mirror shattered completely, and through the empty frame stepped the tall woman in the blood-stained dress. Behind her came others, the missing women, their faces now hidden behind their hair, their dresses stained with darkness. "Welcome to the family," they whispered. Marcus fired his weapon, the gunshots deafening in the enclosed space. The bullets passed harmlessly through the approaching figures, leaving holes in the walls beyond. He backed up until he hit the window, rain still lashing against the glass behind him. The child's voice spoke one final time. "Ring around the rosy." The last thing Detective Marcus Chen saw was a sea of blood-stained dresses and impossibly wide smiles rushing toward him like a wave of darkness. 2 days later, Officer Jenny Rodriguez stood at the iron gates of Willow Manor, staring up at the Victorian mansion that had claimed her partner. Marcus Chen's police cruiser still sat in the driveway, a thin layer of dust already accumulating on its hood. There had been no sign of him since he'd entered the property late Sunday night. She pulled the case file from her car, reviewing the details she already knew by heart. 7 disappearances now, including Marcus. No bodies ever found. No evidence of violence except for small amounts of blood, different blood types, belonging to different victims, found in various rooms of the mansion. The Historical Society's records had yielded little insight. The Blackwood family had built the manor in 1847, making their fortune in textile manufacturing. But rumors had always swirled about the true source of their wealth. Local legends spoke of dark rituals, of deals made with entities that demanded payment in blood. The last Blackwood, Elizabeth, had been found in the master bedroom in 1963, her body contorted in a position that broke 17 bones, her face frozen in a rictus smile that split her cheeks. The official cause of death was ruled unknown. Jenny checked her radio and bulletproof vest. She knew she should wait for backup, but something about this case felt personal now. Marcus had been her partner for 3 years. If there was any chance he was still alive. The front door was unlocked, just as Marcus had reported in his last radio check. Jenny entered with her weapon drawn, sweeping her flashlight across the entrance hall. Nothing seemed to have changed since the crime scene photos taken 2 days ago. Same dust, same cobwebs, same oppressive silence. But something felt different. The air was heavier, charged with an energy that made her skin prickle. And there was a smell, not just the musty odor of decay, but something sweeter, like rotting flowers. A sound caught her attention, music, faint but clear, drifting down from above. A melody played on what sounded like a music box, delicate and haunting. Jenny recognized the tune. Ring Around the Rosy. Against every instinct screaming at her to turn back, she began to climb the stairs. The portraits on the walls seemed to watch her ascent, their eyes following her progress. The music grew louder with each step. When she reached the second floor, Jenny noticed something odd about the floor itself. The dust had been disturbed, but not by footprints. It looked more like something had been dragged, multiple somethings, leaving long, uneven trails that led to the master bedroom. The double doors stood open now, revealing darkness beyond. The music was coming from inside. Jenny's flashlight beam caught movement, the rocking chair, swaying gently. But this time, it wasn't empty. A figure sat there, facing away from the door. Even in the dim light, Jenny recognized the jacket. Marcus. Her voice sounded small in the vast room. Marcus, is that you? The rocking stopped. Slowly, the figure began to turn. Jenny's scream died in her throat. It was Marcus, or what remained of him. His skin was pale as milk, his eyes completely white, and his face. His face was split in a terrible smile that stretched impossibly wide, revealing too many teeth. "Welcome, Jenny," he said, but his voice was wrong, layered with other voices, some high and childlike, others deep and guttural. "We've been waiting for you." The temperature plummeted. In her peripheral vision, Jenny saw movement, figures emerging from the walls, from the floor, from the very shadows themselves. Women in blood-stained dresses, their faces hidden by long dark hair. Children with twisted limbs, crawling across the ceiling like insects. And behind them all, a tall figure in a dress that might once have been a wedding gown, its smile wider even than Marcus's. "The curse must be fed," the voices said in unison. "The family must grow." Jenny fired her weapon, emptying the entire clip into the approaching figures. The bullets passed through them like smoke, leaving only holes in the ancient wallpaper. She turned to run, but the doors slammed shut. In the cracked mirror on the vanity, she could see dozens of faces watching her. All the missing victims, all wearing the same terrible smile. The music box continued its cheerful tune as the shadows closed in. 3 days later, another police officer would enter Willow Manor, searching for Jenny Rodriguez. They would find nothing but her badge, lying in a pool of fresh blood on the master bedroom floor. And late at night, if they listened carefully, they might hear children's voices singing. "Ring around the rosy, pocket full of posies, ashes, ashes, we all fall down." But by then, it would be too late. It was already too late for Jenny, for Marcus, for all of them. Because the curse of Willow Manor lives on, growing stronger with each new addition to its twisted family. The portraits still watch, the shadows still dance, and the smiles grow ever wider. Some say that on particularly dark nights, you can see lights moving in the manor's windows. Figures dancing to unheard music, their faces split in impossible grins. They say if you listen closely, you can hear them calling, inviting you to join their eternal celebration. But if you're wise, you'll drive past those iron gates without stopping. You'll ignore the whispers that follow you home, the shadows that seem to stretch toward you with long, grasping fingers. You'll try to forget the stories, the legends, the curse. Because once Willow Manor chooses you, once you hear its siren song and see those welcoming smiles, there's no turning back. You become part of its history, part of its family, part of its ever-growing collection of broken dolls and twisted souls. The curse must be fed. The family must grow. And somewhere in the darkness of Willow Manor, another music box begins to play. Sarah Coleman knew she had made a terrible mistake the moment she stepped through the front door of 42 Raven Street. The Victorian mansion had seemed like a dream come true when she found the listing. A historic home at a fraction of the market price, just perfect for a struggling writer seeking solitude and inspiration. But now, standing in the dimly lit foyer with dust motes dancing in the weak afternoon light, an overwhelming sense of wrongness crawled up her spine. The previous owners left some furniture. The real estate agent, Mr. Harrison, said behind her, his voice echoing unnaturally in the empty space. They were quite eager to sell quickly. "Family emergency, you understand?" Sarah nodded absently, her attention drawn to the grand staircase that curved up to the second floor. The dark wood was still gleaming despite years of neglect, but something about its graceful arc seemed predatory, like a crooked finger beckoning her upward. "And you said no one's lived here for how long?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Oh, about 3 years now." Mr. Harrison consulted his clipboard. "The Richardsons moved out rather suddenly in 2021. Lovely family. Such a shame about their daughter." Sarah turned sharply. Their daughter? But Mr. Harrison was already moving toward the living room, his polished shoes clicking on the hardwood floors. "Now, as you can see, the original crown molding is still intact." Sarah followed, but her eyes kept being drawn back to the staircase. She could have sworn she saw movement in her peripheral vision. A dark shape gliding up the steps, the flutter of a dress disappearing around the corner. But when she looked directly, there was nothing there. The tour continued through the first floor, a formal dining room with a crystal chandelier that tinkled softly despite the absence of any breeze. a library with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves that seemed to absorb sound like a sponge, and a kitchen with modern appliances that felt jarringly out of place among the Victorian architecture. "And of course, you'll have plenty of room to write," Mr. Harrison said, gesturing to the library. The previous owner was an author as well, actually, though she never did finish her last novel. "What happened?" Sarah asked, running her fingers along the spines of leather-bound books. "Nervous breakdown, I believe." Started rambling about voices in the walls, scratching sounds in the ceiling. He laughed, but it sounded forced. "Old houses make all sorts of noises, of course. Nothing to worry about." Sarah was about to respond when she heard it. A sound so faint she almost thought she imagined it. A child's laughter, drifting down from upstairs, followed by the patter of running feet. "Is someone else here?" she asked, her heart beginning to race. Mr. Harrison frowned. "No, the house is empty. Perhaps it's coming from outside?" But they both knew it wasn't. The sound had been too clear, too close. And now there was something else, a soft humming, a lullaby Sarah almost recognized but couldn't quite place. "Shall we see the upstairs?" Mr. Harrison suggested, though he looked less eager than before. The staircase creaked beneath their feet as they ascended, the wood groaning like something in pain. Sarah's hand trembled slightly as she gripped the banister, and she could have sworn the carved wooden roses that decorated it were warm to the touch, as if they had been recently handled. The second floor was a long hallway with doors on either side, all closed except for one at the very end that stood slightly ajar. As they walked down the corridor, Sarah noticed that the wallpaper, though faded, showed a repeating pattern of birds in flight. But something was wrong with them. Their wings were twisted at impossible angles, their beaks open in what looked more like screams than songs. "This was the master bedroom," Mr. Harrison said, opening the first door on the right. "Quite spacious, as you can see." But Sarah wasn't listening anymore, because she had just noticed something that made her blood run cold. In the dust that covered the hardwood floor of the hallway, there were footprints, small footprints, like those of a child, leading to that partially open door at the end. "Mr. Harrison," she interrupted, "you said the house has been empty for 3 years?" "That's right." "Then why are there fresh footprints in the dust?" The real estate agent turned, his face paling as he followed her gaze. The footprints were unmistakable now, and as they watched in horror, another appeared, and another, as if an invisible child was walking slowly toward them. The temperature in the hallway plummeted. Sarah's breath came out in visible puffs of vapor as the humming returned, louder now, coming from behind that door at the end of the hall. It swung open with a long, drawn-out creak. "We should go," Mr. Harrison whispered. But Sarah was already moving forward, drawn by a morbid curiosity she couldn't explain. The footprints led into what appeared to be a child's bedroom, frozen in time. A dollhouse sat in one corner, an exact miniature replica of the house they were standing in. Teacups were arranged on a small table, waiting for guests who would never arrive. And on the wall, Sarah's scream caught in her throat. The wallpaper here was different, covered in childish drawings done in what looked like red crayon. But as she got closer, she realized with mounting horror that it wasn't crayon at all. "The Richardson girl," Mr. Harrison said behind her, his voice shaking. "She was found in here. They said she'd been talking to someone. An invisible friend. Said the house told her to." He couldn't finish the sentence, because at that moment, all the doors in the hallway slammed shut simultaneously, and the humming turned into a high-pitched keening that made Sarah's teeth ache. The temperature dropped even further, and frost began to form on the windows. "We have to get out," Sarah gasped. But when she turned to the door, she saw a small figure standing there. A little girl in a white dress, her face hidden by long dark hair. She was holding something in her hands, a doll that looked exactly like Sarah. "Will you play with me?" the girl asked, her voice echoing as if coming from very far away. "Everyone else leaves, but the house says you'll stay. The house says you're perfect." The doll in her hands began to bleed. Sarah ran. She shoved past Mr. Harrison, who stood frozen in terror, and sprinted down the hallway. Behind her, she could hear laughter. Both the child's and something deeper, older, something that seemed to come from the very walls of the house itself. She took the stairs two at a time, nearly falling in her haste. The front door was right there, just a few more steps. But when she grabbed the handle, it wouldn't turn. The door was sealed shut, as solid as if it had been painted onto the wall. Sarah spun around, pressing her back against it, and that's when she saw them. Shadows sliding down the walls like black tears, taking shape as they pooled on the floor. The chandelier above began to swing, though there was no breeze. And then the house began to scream. It wasn't a human sound. It was the shriek of tearing wood and shattering glass, the groan of buckling floors and cracking foundations. It was the accumulated pain and hunger of a place that had fed on fear and death for over a century. The walls seemed to pulse like a heartbeat, and Sarah could see faces pressing against the wallpaper from within, trying to break through. "Please," she whispered, though she didn't know who she was begging. "Please let me out." "But you just got here," said the little girl, who was suddenly standing at the top of the stairs. "And the house is so hungry." The shadows were climbing up Sarah's legs now, cold as ice and solid as chains. She could feel the house's hunger, its ancient and terrible need. As her vision began to fade, she saw Mr. Harrison's face appear in one of the windows, mouthing something she couldn't understand. Had he escaped? Or had he been here all along, just another trick of the house? The last thing Sarah saw before the darkness took her was the little girl's smile, too wide and full of too many teeth. And she realized, in that final moment of clarity, why the house had been so cheap, why it had chosen her, why it had waited so patiently. Because it didn't just want anyone. It wanted a writer, someone to tell its story, forever. They found Sarah Coleman's car in the driveway of 42 Raven Street 3 days later, after her sister reported her missing. The house was empty, of course. It always was. But if you pass by on a quiet night, you might hear the sound of typing coming from the library window. And if you look closely, you might see a face pressed against the glass. A woman, endlessly writing the stories of all those who came before her and all those who will come after. Because the house that screamed never stays empty for long. It just waits, and watches, and hungers. The renovation crew had quit by the end of the first week. None of them would give Margaret Turner a straight answer about why, but their foreman had pulled her aside on the last day, his weathered face unusually pale. "Ma'am," he'd said, eyes darting to the old Victorian's walls. "Some places don't want to be changed. This is one of them." Now, 3 weeks later, Margaret stood alone in what was supposed to be her dream home's newly remodeled kitchen, listening to the whispers. They came from inside the plaster, voices so faint she could almost convince herself they were just the house settling. Almost. Scrape, scrape, scrape. The sound came from within the wall behind the antique stove, like fingernails against wood. Margaret pressed her ear to the yellowed wallpaper, holding her breath. The scratching stopped, replaced by what sounded like a child's whisper. "She's listening." Margaret jerked away from the wall. The voice had been clear as crystal, inches from her ear. She grabbed her phone from the counter, hands shaking as she dialed the local historical society. After 3 rings, a woman answered. "Bedford Historical Society. This is Patricia speaking. This is Margaret Turner. I bought the old Morrison place on Elm Street. I need to know if anything happened here. Anything unusual." A long pause followed. When Patricia spoke again, her voice was carefully neutral. "The Morrison house has a complicated history, Mrs. Turner. Perhaps you'd like to come by the society? We have extensive records." An hour later, Margaret sat in Patricia Henderson's cramped office, surrounded by filing cabinets and the musty smell of old papers. The historian, a woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair and sharp eyes, placed a thick file on the desk between them. "The house was built in 1887 by Thomas Morrison," Patricia began, opening the file. "He was a prominent doctor who specialized in treating mental illness. Progressive for his time, or so he claimed. He believed the mentally ill could be cured through intensive treatment." She pulled out a sepia photograph showing a stern-faced man standing before the house. Even in the old image, the Victorian's windows seemed to loom like dark eyes. "What kind of treatment?" Margaret asked, though something in Patricia's tone told her she didn't want to know. He converted the house into a private asylum. The walls were specially constructed with observation passages, narrow corridors hidden between the rooms where orderlies could monitor patients without being seen. But there were rumors. Patricia hesitated. Rumors that his methods went beyond simple observation. She produced another photograph, this one showing the house's interior during renovation work in 1962. The exposed wall cavity revealed a cramped passage, its wooden walls covered in scratch marks. 23 patients died under his care, all ruled natural causes, but Patricia pulled out a newspaper clipping from 1891. This article raises questions about screams heard at night, about patients talking to people in the walls. The investigation was inconclusive, but Morrison's reputation never recovered. He died in 1893, found in one of the observation passages, apparently from a heart attack. His face, according to the coroner's report, was frozen in an expression of absolute terror. Margaret felt cold despite the office's stuffy air. And after that, the house passed through several owners. None stayed longer than a few years. There were incidents, people reporting voices, scratching sounds. In 1973, a family fled in the middle of the night, leaving all their belongings. Their 8-year-old daughter had been talking to what she called the wall people for weeks. The night they left, she told her parents the people were coming out to make her one of them. The scratching Margaret had heard in her kitchen suddenly felt much more sinister. Why wasn't any of this in the disclosure documents? Patricia's expression was sympathetic but unsurprised. Most of it is local legend, nothing officially documented. I should mention, she hesitated again. Every time someone has tried to renovate the house, to alter the walls in any way, the crews quit, Margaret finished, like mine did, or worse. Patricia pulled out one final document, a police report from 1962. During the renovation attempt I showed you in the photograph, 2 workers disappeared. They were dismantling one of the observation passages when she shook her head. They were never found. The project was abandoned. Margaret thought of the half-demolished wall in her kitchen, the exposed laths and plaster. I need to go, she said, standing abruptly. Thank you for the information, Mrs. Turner. Patricia's voice stopped her at the door. If you hear them, the whispers, don't answer. Don't let them know you're listening. And whatever you do, don't go into the walls. Once they know you can hear them, they'll never stop calling. The drive home felt longer than usual, the winter sunset casting long shadows across the road. Margaret's mind raced with questions. Should she sell the house? Would anyone even buy it if she disclosed what she knew? She'd sunk her life savings into the property, into the renovations. The house loomed before her as she pulled into the driveway, its windows dark against the twilight sky. Had they always looked so much like staring eyes? Welcome home, we missed you, we've been waiting, so patient, so hungry. The whisper seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, sliding through her mind like ice water. Margaret froze, key halfway to the lock. Come inside, come see what we've found. While you were gone, such pretty things behind the walls. Stop it, she whispered. You're not real. This isn't real. Laughter echoed in her head, multiple voices overlapping, some childlike, some ancient and raspy, all wrong somehow. We're as real as the doctor made us, as real as the pain that shaped us, as real as the walls that hide us. Come see, come see, come see. The key turned in the lock on its own. The door swung open, revealing darkness beyond. Margaret stood frozen in the doorway, heart pounding. The darkness inside seemed alive, pulsing with shadowy movements. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. Come in, the doctor will see you now. Her feet moved of their own accord, carrying her into the house. The door swung shut behind her with a sound like a sigh. In the sudden darkness, the walls seemed to breathe. The renovation work had exposed portions of the house's skeleton, stripped wallpaper revealing ancient laths, holes knocked in plaster showing the secret passages beyond. As Margaret's eyes adjusted to the dim light, she saw movement in those gaps, fleeting shadows, glimpses of pale faces, reaching hands. His way, this way, we have so much to show you. The whispers led her to the kitchen, where the demolished wall gaped like an open wound. The exposed passage beyond was barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through. Something moved in that darkness, a suggestion of motion, a deeper shadow against the black. "What do you want?" Margaret's voice shook. "To heal you, to help you, the doctor knows best. He'll make you better, make you one of us." Cold air rushed from the opening, carrying the scent of decay. In the dim light, Margaret could see that the wooden walls of the passage were covered in marks. Not just scratch marks, but words carved deep into the grain. "Help us. Save us. Kill us." The same phrases repeated over and over, some fresher than others. A sound echoed from deep within the walls, the shuffle of feet, the rustle of cloth, coming closer. "Time for your treatment, the doctor is waiting." Margaret turned to run, but the kitchen door slammed shut. All the doors slammed shut, the sound reverberating through the house like gunshots. The whispers rose to a fever pitch, dozens of voices speaking over each other. "No escape, no escape, the walls hold us, the walls keep us, the walls are us." A hand emerged from the wall opening, bone-white, impossibly thin, fingers too long and jointed wrong. It reached for her, followed by another hand. Another, the darkness birthing a writhing mass of reaching limbs. Margaret screamed and backed away, but the other walls were splitting open now, hairline cracks spreading like spider webs across the plaster. Behind the wallpaper, faces pressed outward, hollow-eyed, mouths stretched in silent screams. Join us, the doctor will see you now." A figure stepped out of the main opening, tall, impossibly tall, wearing a doctor's coat stained with ancient brown. Its face was a ruin of surgical scars, mouth sewn into a permanent smile. "Dr. Morrison, or what was left of him." "My dear," it said, voice like rustling paper, "you've been unwell. We need to begin your treatment immediately." More figures emerged behind him, patients in tattered Victorian asylum gowns, their bodies twisted and wrong, modified by decades of the doctor's treatments. They moved in jerky, broken ways, heads twitching at impossible angles. "No," Margaret whispered. "Please." "Resistance," the doctor said, "is a symptom. We'll cure you of that." He held up hands filled with rusted surgical instruments. "Though I fear this may require intensive intervention." The patients surged forward, their cold hands grabbing Margaret, pulling her toward the wall opening. She fought, but there were too many of them. Their touch burned like ice, sending waves of numbness through her body. Welcome home, you'll never leave, never leave, never leave." They dragged her into the passage, the doctor following with his instruments gleaming. The last thing Margaret saw was the kitchen sealing itself behind her, plaster flowing like water to close the opening. Then darkness, cold, the whispers, and the treatment began. Weeks later, a new renovation crew arrived at the Morrison house. The property had been sold again after Margaret Turner's disappearance. As they began removing wallpaper in the kitchen, they heard it, a whisper, faint but clear, coming from within the wall. Help me, he's still cutting, still changing us, help me, I'm still here, I'm still." But when they pressed their ears to the wall, the voice changed, became many voices, laughing. Too late, you're next, the doctor will see you now." The crew quit that afternoon. The house remains unchanged, its walls holding their secrets, their whispers, their screams. Sometimes, late at night, lights can be seen moving in the narrow spaces between rooms, shadows passing behind the plaster, figures glimpsed in windows that shouldn't be there. And if you press your ear to the walls, you might hear them. The patients, the doctor, and now Margaret too, whispering their eternal chorus. Join us, the doctor will see you now." But by then, it will be too late. The walls will have you. The treatment will begin, and the whispers will never stop. The master key turned smoothly in the lock of room 1408, but head maintenance engineer Robert Diaz didn't open the door. Not yet. After 23 years working at the Hawthorne Hotel, he knew better than to rush this particular task. "Third time this month," he muttered, checking the electromagnetic field meter in his free hand. The readings were already off the charts, and he hadn't even opened the door yet. "What's got you so active lately, huh?" The brass numbers on the door, 1408, seemed to shimmer slightly in the dim hallway light. The hotel had tried to remove them once, back in '97. The numbers had reappeared the next morning, burned into the woods so deeply they couldn't be sanded out. Robert keyed his radio. "Base, this is DS. Beginning monthly inspection of 1408. Starting time, 3:47 a.m. Copy that." Angela's voice crackled back from the security desk. "Monitors are up. We've got eyes on you from both ends of the hall. Timer set for 15 minutes. If you're not out by then..." "I know the protocol." Robert squared his shoulders. Going in. The door opened with a whisper of wood against carpet. The room beyond was dark, but not empty. Never empty. Standard procedure was to do a quick check of the basic maintenance points: plumbing, electrical, HVAC, and get out. Don't look in the mirrors. Don't acknowledge any sounds. Don't respond if something calls your name. Robert flicked on his flashlight and stepped inside. Room 1408 appeared, at first glance, to be a normal luxury suite. King-size bed with crisp white linens. Elegant furniture in dark wood. Heavy curtains drawn against the night. But the details were wrong. The shadows fell at impossible angles. The wallpaper pattern shifted when viewed directly. And the mirrors. Robert kept his eyes away from the mirrors. He moved to the bathroom first, checking the faucets with practiced efficiency. The water ran clear, then red, then clear again. Standard for 1408. The toilet flushed with a sound like distant screaming. Also standard. 2 minutes elapsed. Angela's voice reported. "All readings normal on our end." Robert knew better. The readings were never normal in 1408. The hotel had just learned to redefine what normal meant for this room. He moved to check the electrical outlets next. The EMF meter's display was flickering rapidly between numbers now, occasionally showing symbols that shouldn't have been possible on a digital display. As he knelt by the first outlet, he heard it. The sound they all dreaded in 1408. Humming. A child's voice, humming a lullaby just on the edge of recognition. Don't respond. Don't look. Complete the checklist and get out. The humming grew louder as Robert tested the outlets, moving clockwise around the room. The air temperature dropped steadily, his breath visible now in the beam of the flashlight. Ice crystals began forming on the walls, spreading in patterns that looked disturbingly like reaching hands. 5 minutes, Angela reported. "Robert, your vitals are elevating." He keyed his radio with shaking fingers. "Just cold." Proceeding with HVAC check. The humming stopped abruptly. In the sudden silence, Robert could hear something moving inside the walls. A wet, sliding sound, like something large pulling itself through the spaces between rooms. The thermostat panel hung on the wall between two mirrors. It was the most dangerous part of the inspection because you had to look up, had to risk seeing what moved in the reflected spaces of 1408. Robert took a deep breath and raised his flashlight. The temperature display was cycling rapidly through numbers: 72, 45, 23, -17, infinity, 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. Movement caught his eye. Something dark shifting in the mirror to his left. "Don't look, don't look, don't look." 7 minutes. Angela's voice was tense. Thermal cameras showing multiple cold spots moving in your vicinity. Robert's hands moved automatically through the thermostat check sequence. The humming had started again, but different now. Multiple voices, slightly out of sync. The lullaby's melody twisted into something that made his teeth ache. "Almost done. Almost out. Just don't look up. Don't look at the mirrors. Don't." "Robert." The voice came from directly behind him, high and sweet and wrong. "Robert, why won't you look at me? I'm so much prettier now. It's not real. Complete the checklist. Get out. Don't you remember me, Robert? From last time? From every time?" Ice crackled across the thermostat panel, forming crystalline patterns that looked like screaming faces. The humming had become a chorus now, dozens of children's voices singing wordlessly. 9 minutes. Angela's voice shook slightly. "Robert, readings are spiking across all instruments." He turned to check the final electrical outlet, keeping his eyes fixed on the floor. The carpet pattern was moving, dark stains spreading and receding like waves, forming shapes he refused to recognize. The voice spoke again, closer now. "We're all here, Robert? Everyone who's ever entered room 1408. Everyone who's ever tried to leave. Would you like to see? 11 minutes. Robert, get out of there. The readings are dash. Static consumed the rest of Angela's warning. Robert's flashlight flickered, dimmed, went out. In the sudden darkness, he could hear movement all around him. Soft footsteps, rustling fabric, the wet sound of something dripping. Don't look up. Don't run. Walk calmly to the door. But you haven't finished your inspection, the voice said, laughing now. Don't you want to see what's behind the mirrors? Don't you want to know why no one ever stays in room 1408? Robert began walking backward toward where he knew the door should be. His flashlight was dead, the only illumination now coming from the ice crystals themselves, which gave off a pale, corpse-like glow. The humming reached a fever pitch, the voices harmonizing into something that wasn't music anymore, but pure sound, pure wrong. The temperature plummeted further, Robert's skin burning with cold. His back hit the door, or what should have been the door. It was a mirror. Robert's training dissolved. He looked up. The mirror showed room 1408, but wrong, stretched and twisted. The furniture warped into organic shapes that pulsed and breathed. And standing behind him in the reflection was... He spun around. The room had changed. The walls were bleeding now, dark liquid flowing upward against gravity. The bed had become something else, something with too many angles and moving parts. And the ceiling. 13 minutes, Angela's voice crackled through static. Robert? Robert, respond. The ceiling was full of faces, pale, distorted faces pressing down through the plaster like masks worn by something trying to break through. Their mouths moved in sync with the humming, which had become a physical force now, vibrating in Robert's bones. You looked, the child's voice said, delighted. You finally looked. They were emerging from the mirrors now, figures that had been waiting, watching, gathering strength. Some wore the uniforms of hotel staff from decades past. Others were dressed in clothes from different eras, guests who had checked in but never checked out. Their faces were wrong, twisted, as if seen through warped glass. And among them were the children, dozens of them, all holding hands in a circle around Robert, all humming that terrible lullaby. Their eyes were black mirrors, reflecting infinite rooms within rooms within rooms. Welcome to the real room 1408, they said in unison. The room behind the mirrors. The room that's waiting. Always waiting. Robert tried to scream, but the sound froze in his throat. Literally froze. He could feel ice crystals forming in his lungs, spreading through his veins. 14 minutes. Security teams deploying now. Robert, if you can hear this, get out. But there was nowhere to go. The door was gone, replaced by another mirror that showed another version of the room, and another, stretching into infinity. Each reflection contained more figures, more twisted versions of reality, more horrors waiting to be seen. The children's circle tightened. Their hands were cold as death when they took his. Ring around the rosy, they began to sing, pulling him into their dance. Pocket full of posies. Robert's legs moved against his will, forced to dance as ice spread through his body. He could feel himself changing, becoming like them. A reflection of a reflection, a memory of something that had once been human. Ashes, ashes. The walls pulsed. The faces in the ceiling smiled. And in every mirror, infinite versions of room 1408 waited, each containing its own horrors, its own trapped souls, its own eternal dance. We all fall down. At exactly 15 minutes past the start of inspection, the door to room 1408 opened onto an empty hallway. Security teams found Robert's flashlight and EMF meter on the carpet, covered in frost. Of Robert himself, there was no sign. The room looked normal again. Bed made, furniture in place, mirrors reflecting nothing but empty space. The only evidence that anything had happened was a child's handprint in the frost on one mirror, slowly melting away. Angela watched the security footage later, over and over. In the infrared recording, she could see the cold spots moving around Robert, could see the moment when he looked up, could see... She deleted the footage. 2 weeks later, during the next monthly inspection, a new maintenance engineer entered room 1408. And as she checked the electrical outlets, she heard it. humming, a chorus of children's voices led by one that sounded eerily like Robert Diaz, singing an endless lullaby in the room behind the mirrors. But she didn't look up. No one who enters room 1408 looks up anymore. They've learned better. Because once you see what's really in room 1408, once you glimpse what waits behind those mirrors, you never leave. You just become another reflection, another voice in the endless chorus, another dancer in the eternal circle. The room is patient. The room can wait. After all, someone will look up eventually. Someone always does. And the dance continues. If you want to discover more mysterious stories like these, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Hit the bell icon so you don't miss our upcoming stories about mysterious guardians, cursed objects, and family secrets that should never see the light of day. See you in the next video.